Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zack, and today I am driving a 1988 Chrysler New Yorker Turbo. Up front is a 2.2 liter turbocharged inline-4, and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Chrysler New Yorker Turbo for many reasons, but two that definitely stand out. First of all, it's a Turbo K car, although this is technically an E body, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, how it's really just a stretch K car. But the second reason is that this might be the most 80s car to ever exist, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. As we go through it, you're gonna notice that this might be the most symbolic showing of the late 1980s. But if you would like to submit your own vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. And if you'd like to see all of my videos weeks or sometimes months in advance, you can head on over to my Patreon for only $5 a month. But let's get back to that 2.2 liter turbo under the hood. Well, that's actually what makes this vehicle special. So let's actually back up here for a second. In 1988, Chrysler redesigned the New Yorker for its next generation, and we've reviewed one of those here on the channel in 1989. It got a V6 and different headlights and a lot of body style changes. However, for the 1988 year, they still sold this, which was the old body style, but gave it the turbo engine, the only engine offered. And this is the only time that New Yorker Turbo was the full name. They had the turbo trim level, so you could get a Chrysler New Yorker Turbo, but this is the Chrysler New Yorker Turbo. Do you hear the difference? I know it's a little weird, but it's a one-year only vehicle where it was sold alongside the new generation. Very, very strange, and that's all thanks to that 2.2 liter. Now, it is a turbocharged engine. We've seen it in like the Shelby Charger. We've seen it in the Dodge Daytona. It's a good, fun little engine. However, the word on the street, the rumor of rumors, is that Chrysler had extra engines left over from the Dodge Omni GLHS, and so they tossed it into this. Now, I've seen reports and forum posts confirming and denying that story, so it's a little bit of hearsay, but it is relatively powerful and puts some pep in this car's step. Like I said, paired to it is an automatic transmission. Now, that was done on purpose because they wanted a more upscale buyer. Now, this with a 5-speed on the floor would be absolutely ludicrous, but they never offered that. Last but not least, it is front-wheel drive. So how does it feel to drive the Chrysler New Yorker Turbo? Well, it's a lot of fun, and we'll talk about it with the final thoughts, but this era of cars is kind of weird. It's unsure of itself because, as we'll talk about with the interior, this car is incredibly luxurious. The steering is super light. The ride is nice and floaty. But then you get on it, you get turbo whistle, and it's sporty. It's a weird juxtaposition. It shouldn't be doing that, but it sounds like a tuner car. But it has the looks of any regular bingo night parking lot. That's so weird. All right, here we go. A nice leisurely corner in the back roads of Wisconsin. Oh, it still has that floatiness. But then the turbo's there. It's so weird. It's like when you have pimples, but also a deep voice. It doesn't visually make sense. Here we go, another corner. Let's go. What is this thing? I don't know if anyone knows, but it's fun. It's something. It's something for sure. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have digital gauges. Absolutely love the look of these. We have a traveler screen off to the left with our average MPG and eco. Everything is health bars for the oil pressure, battery voltage, coolant temperature, and fuel. The speed, the odometer, all digital. I love, love, love this. But then down below, we have wood paneling. So again, it's this weird mix of technologies. It has 1 foot in the future and 1 foot in the past. The steering wheel doesn't have anything on it, although I do have a stalk for cruise control and the wipers. I don't get anything besides the horn, which still works. Off to the left, we do have a headlight switch, climate vent, and rear defrost. And moving on to the door, we have our latch to get in and out, power windows, and our power mirrors way back by your left elbow. We also get this really nice material on the door. The New Yorker was luxury. It wasn't the creme de la creme. It wasn't peak luxury. That was still saved for the Imperial, but this was pretty close to the top. Moving into the center, we have a digital readout on the radio. We have a fader and bass and treble adjustments, a cassette player and favorites, AM and FM. And down below, we have the climate controls. Of course, we have our cigarette lighter. Gotta have that in 1988. And then we get some cubbies. So we get a little storage cubby up at the top and then a larger storage cubby down below. Love this. Again, wood paneling, a foot in the past. These look like they're straight out of 1975, but they're here in 1988 attached to a 4-cylinder turbo. Interestingly, I didn't realize till after filming, but there are cup holders down below that big cubby, and unfortunately it still fails, but they do in fact at least have cup holders. And then we get these really cushy seats. It's not actually technically a bench seat, but there is nothing between the two seats. The two seats are touching each other, and they're incredibly comfortable. I think they really help the cushy feel, but hurt the sportiness of the car. As you saw with the driving experience, I'm kind of flopping all over the place, but that's okay. The New Yorker was a more regal, comfortable experience, or at least it was supposed to be. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats with some interesting design choices, so let's go hop back there. All right, we're in the back of the 1988 Chrysler New Yorker Turbo, and a couple of things to note. First of all, the headroom isn't that great. So this is technically an E-body car. That's what these platform cars were known as. But the E-bodies, or the E-platform, was really just a slightly extended K platform. So people call these K cars, they call them E-bodies. It's really the same thing. It's a slightly modified K platform. That being said, when they extended it, they didn't really change much about the roof. So my head is still hitting the roof, which is unfortunate. I do have map lights as well as regular lights in the C-pillars back here. We have grab handles. The seats are incredibly comfy. They're as comfy as they look here on camera. And we do get a center console that folds down a big chunky foam brick. The interesting thing that I wanted to mention was this C-pillar right here. So if I actually slouch down a little bit, this C-pillar was designed so that a important person could ride back here, and from the side, you can't see their face. Now, if they look out like this, obviously you could see their face, but the way that they designed this, it's almost like it's like the car is doing this for you. You aren't going to make eye contact with the people next to you. That was the goal. And of course, they did do New Yorker limos too, and that was still applied there, which is really, really neat. So it kind of gave you a little bit of privacy in the back of your New Yorker. Fun little fact for you today. Let's hop into the very back. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. All right, so we're on the back of the Chrysler New Yorker. Now, something to note is that this is, of course, of the era where the car had two separate keys. This Chrysler key to the right is for the ignition and the doors. The key to the left is just for the trunk, only for the trunk. So you could give this key to the valet, they could lock your car, they could drive your car, park it, whatever, but they cannot access the trunk. There is no interior trunk release, so anything you put in here is gonna be safe as long as they don't have this key. So come up here, move this to the side. There's a little catch there. Chrysler always does teeth up. And there you go. We are in the back of the Chrysler New Yorker. Pretty decent sized trunk, as most cars in this era had, so that's not anything new, but I really like that dual key system. No features to talk about, but that's the trunk of a Chrysler New Yorker. Let me make sure I have the keys before I close it. All right, I visually can see them. There we go. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I love the look of the Chrysler New Yorker Turbo. I love it. I mean, there's no other words to describe this automobile. I love the chunkiness, I love the square, I love how retro and old school that it looks, but as we mentioned, it has something new school kind of under the hood. And we'll talk about that in a second here, but let's finish this walk around. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I can drive new cars all day and tell you about the specs and tell you about the horsepower and how they're being eco-friendly and XYZ, but this is what makes me smile, this is what makes me giggle, and this is what I founded the channel on. So here's a Chrysler New Yorker Turbo in all of its beautiful glory. With all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving the New Yorker Turbo? Well, I love it. It's so weird, and the whole generation, really the late 1980s, the 1980s as a whole for luxury cars was a very uncertain and very weird era because we had the strict crackdown of the 1970s and the oil crisis and the emissions crackdown. What used to make luxury cars really luxurious were those big buttery V8s that they used to power them with. Well, in the 1980s, you couldn't really have that anymore. At least the government said no. So they had to look to alternatives. Their identifying factor, their main characteristic was no longer. And so you got a lot of these weird answers here in the 1980s in terms of power plants in luxury cars. We saw Ford using a BMW diesel engine in the Lincoln Continental. We saw Cadillac experimenting with diesel V8s. We also saw Cadillac experimenting with the 864 engines. That was basically early cylinder deactivation, and we all know how that went. And then you had Chrysler experimenting with turbo cars. This was kind of their answer for the time being. And so that ended up producing was a car that feels very unsure of itself. It has kind of an identity crisis because the engine down below is sporty, it's fun, but the chassis in which it's put into is luxurious and smooth and slow. It's a track star, but also a finger painter. And then you even have the mix inside the car. You have these beautiful digital gauges, but they're set on top of this old 70s looking wood. The steering wheel looks like it would be a big, thin steering wheel from the 70s, but it's actually small, like an 80s car.
This car would also usually have a little module that would actually talk to you and tell you when the lights are on or when you're unbuckled and things like that. However, it unfortunately has fried since this car came out. This happens to all of them. The old New Yorkers and LeBarons used to talk to you, but the boards get corrosion on them as seen here, and they no longer work. So you can look up the cars talking to you and telling you warnings, but this car was supposed to have it, but unfortunately it broke.
It's not a bench seat like we had the previous decade. All of this together, this car is so unsure, but that's kind of where the beauty lies because it's not like anything else. It's not trying to be a full-on sports car. It's not trying to be a full-on luxury car. It's somewhere in the middle, some interesting gray zone that I can't quite put my finger on. But what I can do is show you the Chrysler New Yorker Turbo from 1988, a weird crossover one-year-only car. They sold 68,000 of these in 1987, but for 1988, they sold just over 8,000. What a bizarre 80s automobile. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Aaron for letting me borrow his New Yorker Turbo for today's video. Aaron has been a very dear friend of mine for years and years and years now. I've reviewed so many of his cars. This is one of his latest acquisitions, and I have to say it might be one of the coolest. So huge thank you to Aaron. I will link his YouTube channel down in the description below. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.